They thought the family just moved away, until a drone captured their van hidden in the forest. The drone's hum was a mosquito in the vast, indifferent quiet of the Oregon woods. For 16-year-old Finn, it was the sound of escape. Up here, tethered to the sky by a thread of radio waves, the world shrank to a manageable pixelated grid. His parents' arguments, the suffocating smallness of his town, the gnawing loneliness, it all dissolved into the green canopy below. He was piloting his DJI Mavic 3. A ridiculously expensive piece of tech he'd saved for 2 years to buy, pushing its range to the absolute limit. The controller screen showed a live feed of Emerald Ocean, a rolling expanse of Douglas firs and ancient cedars that swallowed the light. He was looking for the old quarry, a place rumored to have a hidden waterfall. The signal strength indicator was starting to blink, a gentle warning. He should have turned back 10 minutes ago, but the lure of the unseen, the promise of a discovery that was his alone, was too strong. He pushed the joystick forward, the drone, a silent predator gliding over the treetops. That's when he saw it. A flicker of something unnatural, a shape that didn't belong. Finn slowed the drone, dropping its altitude, the camera gimbal tilting down. The image on his screen sharpened, resolving out of the blur of green and brown. It was a van, an old beat-up Ford Econoline, its once white paint now a leprous patchwork of rust and peeling primer. It was tucked deep within a grove of hemlocks, almost perfectly concealed from above, but one patch of its roof, glinting with morning dew, had betrayed it. It was parked on a bed of pine needles and rotting leaves, no tracks leading to it. As if it had been dropped from the sky. A cold curiosity, sharp and unsettling, pricked at him. Who would leave a van out here, miles from the nearest logging road? He zoomed the camera in, the digital magnification degrading the image into a mosaic of noisy pixels. He could just make out the license plate, caked in mud, but still legible. Oregon plates. He didn't recognize the number. He maneuvered the drone for a better angle. Bringing it lower, the whine of its propellers now a faint, angry buzz that he could almost feel in his teeth, even from miles away. He circled the vehicle slowly. The windows were dark, opaque with grime or maybe blacked out from the inside. There was a dent in the rear bumper, a spiderweb of cracks in the passenger side taillight. It looked abandoned, but not old abandoned, not yet reclaimed by the forest. It felt recent, wrong, a feeling of unease, as tangible as the cold morning air seeping into his bedroom, began to creep up his spine. This wasn't just an abandoned vehicle, it was a hidden one. The care taken to obscure it, the isolation of its location, it was deliberate, secret. He felt a sudden voyeuristic guilt. He was intruding, peering into a place he wasn't meant to see. He should fly away, forget he ever saw it, but he couldn't. The mystery held him captive. He brought the drone even lower, hovering just above the windshield, trying to peer through. The filth, nothing. Just his own reflection. A distorted ghost in the glass. He decided to make one last pass, a low sweep along the driver's side. The drone dipped, its camera aimed at the side door. And then he saw it. It wasn't on the van itself. It was on the ground, next to the front tire. A small object, almost lost in the detritus of the forest floor. He zoomed in, his heart starting to hammer against his ribs. The image clarified. It was a child's shoe, a tiny pink sneaker with a worn-out Velcro strap. One of those shoes that lights up with every step, though its lights were long dead. It was lying on its side, half filled with rainwater and pine needles. The sight of it changed everything. The abandoned van went from a curiosity to something sinister. The hidden place became a potential crime scene. His blood ran cold. The shoe belonged to a little girl. He knew who Lily, the 5-year-old from the house at the end of his street. The Calloway family, they had moved away 3 months ago. That's what everyone said. Packed up in the middle of the night and left. No goodbye, no forwarding address. Just an empty house with a for sale sign that had gathered its own layer of grime. Finn's breath hitched. He remembered Lily, a whirlwind of blonde pigtails and infectious giggles. Always chasing butterflies in her front yard, her pink sneakers flashing with every joyful stomp. He remembered her parents, Sarah and Tom. Sarah, with her kind, tired eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. Tom, a big, imposing man with a booming voice and a temper that could curdle the air. Finn had heard them fighting sometimes, late at night when he was out walking his dog. Shouts that sounded like breaking glass, followed by a heavy, oppressive silence. The official story was that Tom had gotten a big job offer in California, a fresh start. Everyone in the neighborhood had accepted it, gossiped about it for a week, and then moved on. But Finn had always felt a sliver of doubt. It was too sudden, too clean. Now, that sliver had become a chasm of dread. His hands were trembling, the controller slick with sweat. He had to get a better look. He needed proof, something more than a hunch and a single, heartbreaking shoe. He pushed the drone lower, lower than he'd ever dared to fly it in the woods, the rotors starting to clip the edges of ferns. He was feet from the van now, the camera pointed directly at the driver's side window. The glare was intense. He toggled the exposure settings on his controller, trying to cut through the reflection. The image flickered. For a split second, the light shifted, and the darkness inside the van was pierced. He saw a shape. A human silhouette, slumped against the passenger seat, motionless. A gasp escaped his lips, a raw, involuntary sound. His finger slipped on the joystick. The drone lurched sideways, its propellers screaming as they snagged on a low-hanging branch. The feed on his screen went haywire, a chaotic jumble of spinning green and brown, and then, with a sickening crunch of plastic and electronics, it went black. "No, no, no, no," he whispered, his eyes wide with horror. The screen was dead. A single, taunting message glowed in the center. Signal lost. He stared at the blank screen, his mind racing. The drone was down, wrecked. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was what he had seen, or what he thought he had seen. A body? Was it Tom Sarah? The questions swirled in his head, a vortex of terror, and the shoe, Lily's shoe. Where was Lily? He ripped his headset off, the silence of his bedroom rushing in, deafening. The morning sun streamed through his window, casting long shadows across his floor, but the light brought no warmth. A cold chemical dread was flooding his system. He was the only one who knew. The only one who had seen the van, the shoe, the shape in the dark. He stumbled out of his chair, his legs unsteady. He had to tell someone. The police. He had to call 911. But as he reached for his phone, a new thought, paralyzing and cold, stopped him. What would he say? "I was flying my illegal drone miles into a national forest, spying on a van I found, and I think I saw a body." They'd laugh at him. Or worse, they'd charge him. His parents would kill him. The drone was his life savings. And what if he was wrong? What if it was just a trick of the light, a shadow, his imagination running wild? He had no proof. The drone, his only witness, was now a pile of shattered plastic somewhere in the vast, silent woods. He was alone with this terrible secret. He paced his room, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He thought of Lily's laughing face, the way she'd wave at him when he rode his bike past her house. He thought of Sarah's haunted eyes. He thought of Tom's rage, a palpable force that seemed to radiate from him even from a distance. The pieces were all there, a horrifying puzzle assembling itself in his mind. The sudden move, the hidden van, the little girl's shoe, the silhouette. It wasn't a fresh start. It was an ending. He walked to his window and looked out at the street. At the end of the cul-de-sac, the Callaway house stood empty, a silent monument to a family that had vanished. The for sale sign was tilted, one of its legs having sunk into the soft lawn. A few newspapers, yellowed and swollen with rain, lay on the porch. Everyone thought they were gone. Everyone was wrong. They hadn't moved away. They had just ... stopped. Out there, in the woods. In that rusted white van, Finn's gaze drifted from the house to the dark line of the forest that bordered their town. It looked different now. Not like a place of escape, but like a tomb, a vast green grave that was keeping a secret. And the hum of the drone was gone, replaced by a screaming silence in his head. He had to do something, But what if he went to the police with his flimsy, illegally obtained story? He could be dismissed, even punished. But if he did nothing, he would be complicit in that silence. He would be letting the forest keep its secret. He felt a profound, crushing weight settle on his shoulders. The weight of knowledge. The weight of that single pink shoe. He was no longer just a boy with a drone. He was a witness, and he was terrified. He thought about the drone's memory card. If he could get it back, the video would be on it. The proof. But the crash site was miles away, in a wilderness he barely knew. Going out there alone was insane. But what was the alternative? He looked back at the Calloway house. He noticed something he hadn't before. One of the upstairs windows, the one he knew belonged to Lily's room, was slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness in the sun-bleached facade. A faded unicorn sticker was peeling off the corner of the glass. It was like the house was holding its breath, waiting. He had to go back. He had to find the drone. He had to get that memory card. The decision settled in his gut with the cold, hard finality of a stone. He couldn't unknow what he knew. He couldn't unsee what he'd seen. The quiet suburban street, the whispering trees, the very air he was breathing it, was all tainted now by the image of that van, that shoe, that shadow. The world he had woken up in this morning was gone, replaced by a darker, more dangerous version. And he was standing right in the middle of it. The drone wasn't just a toy anymore, it was a key, and he had just dropped it into the lock of a door he was terrified to open. He had to get it back. He had to know what was inside that van. He had to know what happened to Lily. He owed her that. He owed it to the little girl with the flashing pink shoes. The thought of her, alone in the dark woods, made his stomach clench. He had to go now, before anyone else found it, or before whoever put it there came back for it. The Calloway family had been a ghost long before they vanished. Sarah Calloway was a phantom in her own home, a woman made of apologies and trembling hands. Finn saw her most often in the grocery store, her shoulders perpetually hunched, as if bracing for a blow. She had once been beautiful, in a fragile, bird-like way. Finn's mum had a photo from a neighborhood block party years ago. In it, Sarah was laughing, her head thrown back, a genuine, unburdened joy in her eyes. But that woman was gone. The Sarah he knew navigated the aisles with a shopping cart as a shield, her gaze darting around, flinching at loud noises. Her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, were always shadowed with a weariness that went bone-deep. She bought things in a frantic, disorganized way. A single can of soup, a carton of eggs, a bottle of cheap wine, a box of cartoon-themed bandages. Always the bandages. Her arms, in the rare moments she wore short sleeves, were a roadmap of faint, yellowish bruises she tried to hide with long cardigans, even in the summer heat. She'd offer Finn a watery, fleeting smile if their eyes met. A smile that was more a spasm of fear than a greeting, before quickly looking away. Her focus zeroing in on a box of cereal, as if it held the secrets to the universe. She was a study in self-effacement, a woman trying to shrink herself into oblivion. Her husband, Tom, was the opposite. He was a man who took up space, who filled every room with his presence, a loud, suffocating pressure. He was a contractor, big-boned and barrel-chested, with a face that seemed permanently flushed with a low-grade rage. His laughter was too loud, his handshakes too firm. His voice, a drill sergeant's bark that he used on everyone telemarketers. His dog, his wife, his daughter. Finn's dad called him a pressure cooker with a faulty valve. From his own yard, Finn would see Tom in his driveway, meticulously polishing his oversized pickup truck, his movements aggressive and jerky. He'd scrub at a non-existent speck of dirt with a terrifying focus, his jaw clenched, a vein throbbing in his temple. The world seemed to offend him on a fundamental level. A barking dog, a child's laughter from a nearby yard, a car driving too fast down the street each was a personal affront, met with a muttered curse or a glare that could strip paint. And then there was Lily, the bright, vibrant heart of that dark, silent house. She was 5 years old, a sunbeam of a child with her mother's pale blue eyes, but hers were filled with an unblinking, curious light. She was pure, unadulterated life force. She'd spend hours in her front yard, narrating elaborate stories to a council of dandelions, her blonde pigtails bouncing. She had a favorite toy, a stuffed elephant named Ellie, whose grey fur was worn smooth from love. Lily and Ellie were inseparable. She'd drag the elephant through the grass, tuck it into a makeshift bed of leaves, and share her snacks with it, carefully placing a goldfish cracker on its threadbare trunk. Finn was her silent, secret friend. He was a lonely kid, an observer by nature, and he'd watch her from his window, a strange mix of envy and protectiveness swelling in his chest. He saw the moments of pure, untroubled childhood joy. But he also saw the shadows. He saw the way Lily would sometimes freeze in the middle of her play when the front door opened, her body going rigid, her laughter dying in her throat as her father's voice boomed from inside. He saw her learn, with the heartbreaking adaptability of a child in a war zone, to make herself small and quiet. Her games would become whispers, her movements stealthy. She learned to read the weather of her father's moods, an atmospheric science no child should ever have to master. One afternoon, a few weeks before they moved, Finn saw something that etched itself into his memory. He was in his garage, fixing the chain on his bike. Lily was in her yard, trying to fly a kite. It was a cheap, plastic thing with a picture of a cartoon princess on it. There was no wind. The kite would lift a few feet, then dive bomb into the grass. Lily would let out a small, frustrated sigh, pick it up, and try again. Tom came out of the house. He was holding a beer, and his face had that familiar, thunderous look. "What are you doing?" he barked, his voice slurring slightly. "Flying my kite," Lily said, her voice a small, hopeful chirp. "There's no wind, you idiot," he sneered. The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. "You're just making a fool of yourself." Lily's face crumpled. Her lower lip trembled. She looked down at the kite, then back at her father, her eyes wide with confusion and hurt. "But I want it to fly." "Well, it won't," Tom said, taking a long pull from his beer. He walked over to her, his shadow falling over her small body. He snatched the kite from her hands. "This is how you do it." He started running clumsily across the lawn, dragging the kite behind him. It bumped and scraped along the grass. He wasn't trying to make it fly. He was mocking her, his movements a cruel parody of a child's game. He stumbled, caught his foot on the string, and went down hard, the beer bottle flying from his hand and shattering on the driveway. He roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. It wasn't the fall that enraged him. It was the humiliation. He scrambled to his feet, his face purple. He looked at the broken bottle, then at the kite, and then at Lily, who stood frozen, her hands clasped in front of her, her face pale with terror. "Look what you made me do!" he screamed, his voice cracking. He grabbed the kite, and with a savage rip, he tore the plastic princess in two. He snapped the thin wooden dowels over his knee, the cracking sound sharp and violent in the quiet afternoon. He threw the shredded remains at her feet. "Now look at it, it's broken. Just like everything you touch." He turned and stomped back into the house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Lily didn't move for a full minute. She just stared at the wreckage of her kite. Then, a single soundless tear rolled down her cheek. She slowly knelt, her small fingers gathering the torn plastic and broken sticks, as if she could somehow put them back together. She didn't cry out, she didn't sob, she just knelt there, in the ruins of her afternoon, her small shoulders shaking, with a silent, profound grief. From the shadows of his garage, Finn watched, his own hands clenched into fists, a hot, helpless anger burning in his stomach. He wanted to run out there, to scream at Tom, to comfort Lily. But he was just a kid, a 16-year-old boy paralyzed by the ugliness of the world he was just beginning to understand. He stayed hidden, a silent witness to a cruelty that felt as vast and incomprehensible as the sky. That was the moment he understood. The Calloway house wasn't a home, it was a cage, and Lily was its captive bird. The hidden witness in this story wasn't just Finn. It was an old man named George Henderson, who lived 2 houses down. George was a widower in his late 70s, a man who had outlived his wife, his friends, and his own sense of purpose. His life had shrunk to the four walls of his house, and his only connection to the outside world was the window that overlooked the street. He was a watcher, a chronicler of the neighborhood's mundane rhythms, the mailman's daily route, the garbage truck's weekly groan, the comings and goings of his neighbors. He knew who was having an affair, who was in financial trouble, who drank too much on a Tuesday. He saw it all from his throne, a worn-out gazebo positioned for a perfect panoramic view. He had been watching the Callaways from the beginning. He'd seen the hope in Sarah's eyes when they first moved in, a hope that had been systematically extinguished, like a candle in a storm. He'd seen Tom's escalating cruelty, the casual brutalities that happened in plain sight but were ignored by everyone. He'd seen the delivery trucks bringing packages from Amazon almost daily, and then seen Tom, in a rage, throwing those same boxes into the trash, unopened. He'd seen Sarah secretly planting flowers along the side of the house only to find them ripped out of the ground the next day. George had a secret of his own. He had a state-of-the-art security system, a web of high-definition cameras he'd installed after a break-in a few years prior. They weren't just aimed at his own property. One camera, cleverly disguised as a birdhouse, had a perfect, unobstructed view of the Callaways' driveway and front door. It recorded everything, 24/7, storing the footage on a massive, terabyte-sized hard drive in his study. He told himself it was for security. But he knew, in a dark, lonely corner of his heart, that it was because he was afraid of being alone. And watching other people's lives, even their tragic ones, made him feel less invisible. He had the footage of the kite incident. He had footage of Tom grabbing Sarah's arm in the driveway, his fingers digging into her flesh, her face a mask of pain. He had footage of Lily, late one night, sneaking out to the porch to leave a small bowl of water for a stray cat, only to have her father come out and kick it away, screaming at her for encouraging vermin. George had it all, a digital archive of misery. He was the silent, all-seeing eye of the neighborhood. But he had never done anything. He was a coward, he told himself. An old, useless man who was afraid of getting involved. Afraid of Tom. Afraid of shattering the fragile piece of his own quiet life. So he watched, and he recorded, and he did nothing. The guilt was a constant low-level hum in his chest, the background noise of his lonely existence. When the Callaways moved, George knew. It was a lie. He had been awake that night, as he often was, his old body racked with aches that kept sleep at bay. He hadn't seen a moving truck. He had seen Tom's pickup truck, and then, later, the white van. The van wasn't theirs. He'd never seen it before. It had pulled into the driveway just after 2 a.m., its headlights off. Tom had loaded something into the back. Not furniture, something heavy, wrapped in thick blankets. George had zoomed in with his camera, his heart pounding, but the angle was wrong, the darkness too complete. He could only see shapes, outlines, a frantic, furtive energy. He saw Tom's face, illuminated for a moment by the van's interior light. He looked wild, desperate, crazed. Then he saw Sarah get into the passenger seat of the van. She moved like a robot, her face a blank, emotionless mask. She didn't carry a purse, or a bag, or anything. And Lily, he hadn't seen Lily at all. The van had pulled away, again with no headlights, a ghost slipping into the sleeping street. Tom followed in his truck. And then, silence. The next morning, the for sale sign was on the lawn. George had felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He knew what he had seen. He knew it was wrong. He had the footage. The proof that the official story was a lie. He could go to the police. He should go to the police. But the fear, cold and paralyzing, held him in its grip. Tom knew where he lived. What if he came back? What if he wasn't alone? So George did. What he always did, he watched. He saved the footage to a separate password-protected folder on his computer, labeled simply Night, and he waited. He told himself he was waiting for a sign, for someone else to notice, for a hero to emerge. He didn't know that the hero would be a 16-year-old boy with a drone. A boy who was about to stumble into the same nightmare that George had been watching from his window for years. The boy, the old man, the ghost of a mother, the monster of a father, and the radiant, lost child. The players were all in place, the stage was set, and the forest was waiting to give up its dead. The forest floor was a treacherous carpet of damp leaves and slick roots. Every snap of a twig under Finn's feet sounded like a gunshot in the unnerving silence. He'd been walking for over an hour, his school backpack heavy with a bottle of water, a flashlight, and a growing sense of dread. He was following the GPS coordinates from his drone's last known location, a glowing red dot on the map on his phone. The signal was weak, flickering in and out. If his phone died, he would be truly lost. The air grew colder as he ventured deeper, the canopy of trees so thick it blotted out the sun, plunging the world into a perpetual twilight. This was no longer the familiar, friendly woods behind his house. This was something else. Something ancient and menacing. He kept picturing the van, the shoe, the shadow. He kept picturing Lily's face. He found the crash site in a small, mossy clearing. The drone was a mangled wreck of white plastic and black carbon fiber, one of its arms twisted at an impossible angle. It was lodged in the branches of a cedar tree, about 15 feet off the ground. His heart sank. He'd have to climb. The tree's bark was rough and splintery, digging into his palms as he pulled himself up, branch by precarious branch. He tried not to look down. He focused on the drone, his prize, his proof. He reached it, his fingers fumbling with the wreckage, trying to dislodge it. A piece of the propeller, sharp as a razor, sliced his thumb. He hissed in pain, blood welling up, dark and red, against the white plastic. He finally worked the drone free, cradling it like a broken bird. The most important part, the tiny micro SD card, was still safe in its slot. He popped it out, his hands shaking, and tucked it securely into the zippered pocket of his jeans. He was about to climb down when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. The low guttural rumble of an engine. Finn froze, his body pressed against the trunk of the tree. His heart leaped into his throat. He peered through the dense foliage. Down the slope, through a break in the trees, he could see it. A pickup truck. A big, black Ford F-150, its chrome grille glinting dully in the gloom. Tom Calloway's truck. It was parked not 50 yards from where the van was hidden. The engine was idling, a threatening growl that vibrated through the ground. Finn's blood ran cold. What was he doing here? Had he come back for the van? Had he seen the drone? The drivers? Side door opened, and Tom Calloway heaved himself out. He looked different than he had in the neighborhood. His face was gaunt, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He was wearing the same dirty jeans and work boots Finn had seen him in for weeks, but his shirt was torn, and there was a dark, ugly stain on the sleeve. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, a man running on pure and cut adrenaline, and something much darker. He slammed the truck door, the sound echoing through the woods like a coffin lid closing. He walked towards the hidden grove, where the van was parked, his movements agitated and jerky. He was carrying a shovel and a large canvas duffel bag. Finn's mind screamed at him to run, to climb down and disappear into the woods, but he was paralyzed, trapped in his perch. A terrified spectator to a scene he was never meant to witness. Tom disappeared into the grove. For a few agonizing minutes, there was only the sound of the truck's idling engine and the frantic thumping of Finn's own heart. Then, he heard a new sound. The rhythmic, percussive thud of a shovel digging into soft earth. Thud. Scrape thud. Scrape. He was digging. The realization hit Finn with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just coming back for the van. He was coming back to finish something. To bury something. Or someone. The digging went on for what felt like an eternity. Finn's muscles screamed in protest, his legs cramping from his awkward position. The cut on his thumb throbbed. He didn't dare move. He just watched, and listened, and prayed. Finally, the digging stopped. Tom emerged from the grove, his face slick with sweat, his chest heaving. He was no longer carrying the shovel or the bag. He walked back to his truck, got in, and with a roar of the engine, he sped away. His tires churning up mud and leaves. Silence descended once more, heavier and more profound than before. Finn waited, his breath held, until the sound of the engine had completely faded. He stayed in the tree for another 10 minutes, his mind a whirlwind of terror and indecision. He had the memory card. He had the proof. He could go to the police right now, but the image of Tom Calloway's face, the savage, haunted look in his eyes, was burned into his brain. This wasn't just a man who had done a terrible thing. This was a man who was unraveling, a man who had nothing left to lose. A man who was dangerous, and he had just buried something. Finn knew he should leave. He knew he should take his proof and run, but he couldn't. The thought of what Tohu was in that shallow grave, just a stone's throw away, was a hook in his soul. He had to see. He had to know. He climbed down from the tree, his legs trembling so badly he almost fell. He forced himself to walk towards the grove, his feet moving as if through water. The air was thick with the scent of pine and freshly turned earth. He found the spot easily. A patch of ground, roughly 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, was disturbed. The dark, rich soil, a stark contrast to the blanket of pine needles around it. It was a fresh grave, hasty, shallow. Finn stared at it, his stomach churning. He thought of the duffel bag. Was it big enough? He thought of the silhouette in the van. He thought of Sarah Dot, and then he saw it. Sticking out of the loosely packed dirt, a small patch of gray fuzzy fabric. He knelt, his hand reaching out, his fingers trembling. He brushed the dirt away. It was soft, worn, familiar. He pulled at it gently. More of it was revealed. A round floppy ear. A plastic button eye. It was Ellie, Lily's stuffed elephant. A wave of nausea and grief washed over Finn so intensely he had to put a hand on the ground to steady himself. He felt the bile rise in his throat. It wasn't Sarah in the grave. It was the last beloved remnant of her daughter. Tom hadn't just buried a body. He had buried the last piece of Lily's innocence. But where was Lily? Where was Sarah? His gaze was drawn, as if by a magnet, to the van, hidden just a few feet away. The side door was slightly ajar. Tom must have opened it, and, in his haste, forgotten to close it properly. Finn knew he was crossing a line. He was moving from witness to trespasser. But he had to know. He took a deep breath, the air tasting of metal and fear, and he walked to the van. He pulled the door open. The stench hit him first. A thick, cloying, sweetish odor of decay and stale air that made him gag. He covered his nose and mouth with his shirt, his eyes watering. He peered into the darkness. The interior of the van was a chaotic mess. Empty water bottles, fast food wrappers, discarded clothes, and on the floor, in the back, was a small makeshift bed. A pile of dirty blankets and a single flat pillow. And lying on the pillow was a small laminated card. An ID card from a local library. Finn reached in and picked it up. The photo was faded, the corners bent, but the face was unmistakable. It was Sarah Calloway. But her name, printed below the picture, was not Sarah. It was Catherine Miller. Finn stared at the card, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Sarah Calloway wasn't Sarah Calloway. She had another name, another identity. Why? He looked around the van again, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. He saw something else. A child's car seat, strapped into the back bench, and tucked into the side pocket of the car seat, was a folded piece of paper. A drawing, done in crayon, in the unsteady hand of a small child. It was a picture of a house, a sun, and 2 figures. A little girl with blonde pigtails, holding hands with a woman. Underneath, in wobbly letters, it said, "Me and Mummy. Our new home." The little girl was Lily, but the woman she was holding hands with wasn't the Sarah Calloway he knew. The woman in the drawing had long dark hair. A chilling realization began to dawn on Finn, a story far more complex and terrifying than he could have imagined. Sarah wasn't Lily's mother. Who was Catherine Miller? And who was the woman in the drawing? He heard a floorboard creak outside the van. Finn's blood turned to ice. He wasn't alone. He flattened himself onto the floor of the van, his heart hammering against the metal. He peered through the gap between the front seats. A figure was standing in the clearing, near the fresh grave. A woman. She was thin, almost skeletal, with long matted dark hair that hung over her face. She was wearing a threadbare cardigan and dirty jeans. It was the woman from the drawing. She knelt by the grave, her movements slow and weak, as if every motion was an agony. She touched the dirt, her fingers tracing the outline of the disturbed earth. And then she began to speak, her voice a raw, broken whisper. "He told me she was safe," the woman rasped, her voice thick with a grief that was almost animalistic. "He told me he took her to my sisters. The liar, the monster. He took her from me." She looked up, her haunted eyes scanning the silent woods. "Lily," she sobbed, the name a shard of glass in her throat. "My baby, where are you? Where did he take you?" Finn lay frozen in the van, every muscle screaming. This was Lily's mother. The real mother, Catherine Miller, and Tom had taken her child. Cyril, whoever she was his accomplice. This wasn't a family that had moved away. This was an abduction. A conspiracy. And he, Finn, was now trapped in the middle of it. Hiding in the very vehicle that had been their prison, listening to the raw, unfiltered agony of a mother who had lost everything. The conflict wasn't just escalating, it had just become a nightmare from which there was no escape. The woman Catherine remained by the makeshift grave, her body racked with a grief so profound it seemed to suck the very air from the clearing. Finn lay on the van's filthy floor, his breath held, his world shrinking to the narrow gap between the seats. He could see her shoulders shaking, hear the ragged tearing sounds of her sobs. This wasn't just sadness. It was the sound of a soul being ripped apart. He was an unwilling audience to the most private agony imaginable, and the intimacy of it felt like a violation. He had to get out. He had to get to the police. The memory card in his pocket felt like a burning coal. It held the beginning of the story, the drone footage of the van, but he now held the middle, the grave, the fake ID, and the earth-shattering revelation of Catherine Miller. Catherine's weeping subsided into a low, desperate keening. She began to rock back and forth on her heels, her arms wrapped around herself. A mother comforting the empty space where her child should have been. "He said we were starting over," she whispered to the dirt, her voice a broken monologue of betrayal, a new life. Away from ... everything. "He promised he wouldn't hurt us again. He promised." The words hung in the air, thick with a history of violence and broken trust. Finn could piece it together. Tom hadn't just appeared in Catherine and Lily's life. He had been a part of it. A destructive, terrifying part. And Sarah ... where did she fit in? Was she a willing partner in this monstrous deception, or another victim, trapped in Tom's orbit? The fake ID suggested a level of planning, of complicity, that made Finn's skin crawl. He needed to move. Now, while Catherine was distracted by her grief, he began to inch backward, his movements agonizingly slow, trying to slide out of the van's side door without making a sound. His backpack scraped against a metal seat bracket. The sound was minuscule, but in the dead quiet of the forest, it was like a firecracker. Catherine's head snapped up, her wild, grief-stricken eyes locked directly onto the van. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice sharp with a new terror. "Tom, is that you?" Finn froze, his heart stopping in his chest. He was caught. "I know you're in there," she screamed, scrambling to her feet. She was no longer a fragile, grieving woman. A desperate feral energy had taken over. She was a mother bear who smelled a threat near her cub's den. She staggered towards the van, her eyes narrowed. "Show yourself. What did you do with her? Where is my daughter?" Finn's mind raced. If he revealed himself, what would she do? Would she attack him? Scream? Would Tom, who couldn't be that far away, hear her and come back? But staying hidden was no longer an option. He made a split-second decision. He burst out of the van, not towards her, but away, sprinting into the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. "Hey, stop!" Catherine shrieked, a sound of pure fury and desperation. Finn didn't look back, he just ran. Branches whipped at his face, thorns tore at his clothes. He could hear her crashing through the undergrowth behind him, surprisingly fast. Fueled by adrenaline, he was younger, fitter, but he was running on fear. She was running on a mother's rage, a far more potent fuel. He risked a glance over his shoulder. She was closer than he thought. Her face, a mask of determination, her long hair flying behind her. She wasn't going to give up. He pushed himself harder, his lungs burning, his legs pumping. He saw a steep, muddy embankment ahead. His only chance was to go down. He launched himself forward, half running, half sliding down the slick, treacherous slope. He landed in a heap at the bottom, in a shallow, ice-cold creek, the impact knocking the wind out of him. He looked up. Catherine was at the top of the embankment, hesitating. The fall looked too dangerous for her weakened state. She stood there, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with a helpless fury. "You can't hide," she screamed down at him, her voice echoing. "In the trees, I'll find you. I'll find you and I'll kill you for what you've done." She thought he was one of them. She thought he was with Tom. Finn scrambled to his feet, the cold water of the creek soaking his jeans, and plunged back into the woods, leaving her unanswered screams behind him. He ran until he could no longer hear her voice, until his lungs felt like they were going to explode. He didn't stop until he stumbled out onto the main road. Miles from where he had started, a disheveled, mud-stained ghost emerging from the green depths. He collapsed onto the asphalt, gasping for air, his body trembling uncontrollably. He had escaped, but he hadn't escaped the truth. He was now entangled in it, a key player in a drama he didn't understand. And he had made a terrible mistake. By running, he hadn't just terrified a grieving mother. He had confirmed her worst fears. He had made himself the enemy. Back in his room, Finn felt like a ghost haunting his own life. The familiar posters on his wall, the drone controller on his desk, the sunlight streaming through his window, it all belonged to a world that no longer existed. He had the memory card. He plugged it into his computer, his hands still shaking. The video file was corrupted from the crash, but after a tense 10 minutes with a recovery program, he managed to salvage a few seconds of footage. It was shaky, chaotic, but it was undeniable. The van, deep in the woods, the pink shoe, and a single fleeting frame where the light had pierced the windshield, revealing the silhouette of a person slumped inside. It was grainy, indistinct, but it was there. It was proof. He had to go to the police. The thought was both a relief and a terror. He rehearsed the story in his head, trying to edit out the parts that made him sound like a delinquent, the illegal flight path, the trespassing. But there was no way to tell the story without implicating himself. And then, there was Catherine. What would he say about her? That he'd found a hysterical woman in the woods who thought he was her daughter's kidnapper. They would think he was crazy, or worse, lying. His fear was a cold physical presence in the room. Tom Calloway was not just a neighborhood bully. He was a monster. A man who could abduct a woman and her child, hold them captive, and then, apparently, dispose of them. A man who had looked Finn's parents in the eye and lied to them. A man who knew where Finn lived. If Finn went to the police, and Tom found out it was him, the thought was paralyzing. He spent the rest of the day in a state of suspended animation. Jumping at every sound, his eyes constantly drawn to the window, to the empty house at the end of the street. The injustice of it all was a burning acid. In his gut, Catherine's raw primal scream of "Where is my daughter?" echoed in his head. He had seen the grave Tom had dug. But what had he buried? The stuffed elephant. Not a body. So where were they? Where were Sarah and Lily? The silhouette in the van, ... was that Sarah? Had Tom left her there, dead or alive? And if so, where was Lily? The questions were a torment, a riddle with the most horrific possible answers. The antagonist was growing bolder. That night, under the cover of darkness, Tom Calloway returned to the neighborhood. Finn was in his kitchen, trying to force down a sandwich he couldn't taste, when he saw the headlights. It was Tom's truck, pulling slowly down the street. Didn't go to his old house, It parked directly across from Finn's. Finn's blood turned to ice. He ducked below the window, his heart hammering. Was he here for him? Did he somehow know? Had he found the crashed drone? Tom got out of the truck. He wasn't looking at Finn's house. He was looking at George Henderson's house, 2 doors down. He stood there for a long time, a dark silhouette in the orange glow of the streetlights, just staring. There was an unnerving stillness about him, a predatory patience. Then walked across the lawn, George's meticulously manicured lawn, and went straight to the birdhouse, the one that concealed the camera. With a single, violent motion, he ripped it from its post. He held it in his hand for a moment, then smashed it on the driveway, the wood splintering with a sharp crack. He looked up directly at George's front window and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't a greeting, it was a threat. A message. I know you're watching. Stop. He got back in his truck and drove away. Finn was breathless. Tom knew he was being watched. He was tying up loose ends. He was silencing the witnesses. First, he had destroyed the camera. Who was next? The conflict had escalated from a distant, secret horror in the woods to a direct, immediate threat on his own street. Tom wasn't just a kidnapper in hiding. He was a predator, circling, asserting his dominance, making it clear that anyone who got in his way would be dealt with. Finn felt a profound, chilling sense of betrayal. Not by any one person, but by the world he thought he knew. The quiet, safe suburban street was a lie. The adults, the police, the entire system he was supposed to trust, felt distant and useless. He was 16 years old, and he was standing alone against a monster. He looked over at George Henderson's house. A light was on in the upstairs window, the one where George always sat. The old man had seen it. He had to have seen it. Tom had just declared war on him. Finn's fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in his stomach. But now, it was mixed with something else. A hot, defiant anger. Tom had threatened an old man. He had terrorized a mother. He had stolen a little girl. He wasn't going to get away with it. The witness was struggling between fear and conscience. Finn knew he couldn't go to the police alone. They wouldn't believe him. But what if he wasn't alone? What if he had another witness? He made a decision. He grabbed a hoodie, pulled it on, and slipped out his back door. He crept through the backyards, a shadow moving through the darkness, until he was standing on George Henderson's back porch. He could see the old man's silhouette in the window, a lonely figure in the dim light. Finn took a deep breath and knocked on the door. The sound was loud in the night. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the silhouette disappeared. A light came on downstairs. The door opened a crack, held by a chain. George Henderson's face appeared in the gap, pale and frightened. What do you want? The old man whispered, his voice trembling. My name is Finn, he said, keeping his own voice low. I live 2 doors down. I saw what he just did. I saw him destroy your camera. George's eyes widened. He stared at Finn, a flicker of something, fear, recognition, hope, in his gaze. I know about the van, Finn said, his voice barely audible. I know about the Callaways. I think I know what happened. He paused, letting the words sink in. And I have proof. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the micro SD card, holding it between his thumb and forefinger. It was a tiny, insignificant piece of plastic. But in the dim porch light, it felt like the heaviest thing in the world. I think you do too, Finn said, looking the old man directly in the eye. I think you have more than just a broken birdhouse. I think you have everything. The tension was unbearable. The fate of Catherine, of Lily, of Sarah, hung in the balance. Right here on this dark porch, in the space between a terrified boy and a frightened old man. The witness was no longer struggling. He was making a stand. And he was asking the other witness to stand with him. George Henderson stared at the tiny memory card in Finn's hand as if it were a live grenade. His face, illuminated by the yellow porchlight, was a mask of conflicting emotions, fear, shock, and a dawning reluctant resolve. The chain was still on the door, a flimsy barrier against the world that had just come crashing down around him. You need to go, George whispered, his voice raspy. He saw you. If he saw you come here, he didn't see me, Finn insisted, his voice low and urgent. I came through the backyards. Sir, please. We have to do something. That woman, Lily's mother. She's out there, in the woods. She thinks her daughter is dead. And Tom, he's not just going to disappear, he's cleaning up. He started with your camera. What do you think is next? The question hung in the air, sharp and pointed. George's eyes darted nervously towards the street. Then back to Finn. The boy's face was pale, but his eyes were steady, filled with a conviction that shamed George's own terror. This child had more courage than he'd felt in 20 years. With a trembling hand, George slid the chain free. The door swung open. Get in, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Quickly. Finn slipped inside, and George immediately shut and locked the door, leaning against it for a moment as if to catch his breath. The house smelled of old books, lemon polish, and loneliness. It was immaculately clean, a fortress of order against the chaos outside. Here, George said, leading Finn into a small study. The room was dominated by a large wooden desk and a high-end computer setup. Multiple monitors displayed a grid of silent black and white images, the live feeds from the remaining security cameras. And there, in the center of the desk, was the massive hard drive. The archive. You said you have proof, George said, his voice regaining some of its strength. He gestured for Finn to sit. Finn handed him the microSD card. George inserted it into a card reader, and with a few clicks, the salvaged video file appeared on the main screen. It was just a few seconds of spinning, chaotic green. But then, for a brief, stomach-lurching moment, the image stabilized. The van, the pink shoe, the shadow in the window. George leaned forward, his face inches from the screen. He let out a soft, pained gasp. My God, he breathed. It's them. I found the van with my drone, Finn explained, the words tumbling out of him now. He told George everything: the crash, finding the grave with the stuffed elephant, seeing Catherine, Tom's return, the fake ID, with the name Catherine Miller. As he spoke, George listened, his expression growing grimmer with every detail. He didn't seem surprised. He seemed confirmed. When Finn finished, the old man was silent for a long time, his gaze distant. Catherine Miller, George finally said, his voice heavy with a guilt that seemed to age him even further. I knew something was wrong. I knew it from the day they moved in. He turned to his computer. His fingers, surprisingly nimble, flew across the keyboard. He opened a password-protected folder named Night. A grid of video files appeared, each labeled with a date and time. I have been watching them for 2 years, George confessed, his voice thick with shame. I told myself it was for security, but it was cowardice. I saw the cruelty, the fear in her eyes, in the little girl's eyes, and I did nothing. He clicked on a file from 3 months ago, the night they disappeared, the screen filled with the familiar high-definition view of the Callaway driveway. The timestamp read, 2:13 a.m. The white van was there, its side door open like a gaping. More. I saw him load something into the back, George narrated, his voice a low monotone. Wrapped in blankets, I thought. I was afraid it was Sarah's body. He fast-forwarded the footage. He showed Finn the moment Sarah Vaughn, the woman they knew, as Sarah got into the van, her face blank, her movements robotic. He zoomed in on Tom's face, illuminated by the truck's dome light, his expression a terrifying mixture of rage and panic. But you see, George said, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. Lily is not there. I watched the entire night. She never comes out of the house. He drives away with the woman, and the house is just, empty. A new, horrifying possibility began to dawn on Finn. So, Lily was still inside. When they left? No, George said, his voice dropping even lower. That's not it. Look, he opened another folder, this one labeled Apartment for B. It was filled with documents, scanned bank statements, credit card bills, public records. George was more than a watcher. He was a researcher, a digital ghost who had been digging into Tom Calloway's life for months. Tom Calloway is not his real name, George explained, pulling up a driver's license from another state. The picture was of a younger Tom, but the eyes were the same, cold and hard. The name on the license was Mark Peterson. He has a record: assault, domestic violence. There was a restraining order against him, taken out by a woman in Portland. A woman named Catherine Miller. He pulled up another document. A birth certificate. For a child named Lily Rose Miller. Mother, Catherine Miller. Father, Mark Peterson. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with dizzying force. He didn't just abduct them from our neighborhood, Finn breathed, his mind reeling. He abducted them before. From their real life. Yes, George said. He took them from Portland. He brought them here, to this town, where no one knew them. He created new identities. He forced Catherine to become Sarah, to play the part of his happy wife. He kept her a prisoner in that house. A psychological prison, enforced by threats and violence. The bruises on Sarah's arms, her fear, her haunted eyes. It wasn't the portrait of a victim of domestic abuse. It was the portrait of a hostage. But what about the other woman? Finn asked. The one who got in the van. The one who looked like Sarah. George fell silent. He clicked through a few more files, his face grim. He pulled up a grainy photo, a screenshot from a social media profile that had long since been deleted. It showed the woman, Finn, and the rest of the neighborhood knew as Sarah Calloway. She was standing next to another woman, her arm around her. They looked alike. They could have been sisters. The caption read, "So proud of my big sis, Jessica, for getting her nursing degree." Jessica, George whispered. Sarah's real name was Jessica. She was Catherine's older sister. A wave of cold dread washed over Finn. George nodded slowly, his eyes closing for a moment. He opened a final file. It was a news article from a small town in southern Oregon, dated 6 weeks ago. The headline read, "Local nurse dies in tragic hiking accident." The article was short, with few details. A woman, Jessica Miller, had fallen from a cliff while hiking alone. Her death had been ruled an accident. The photo in the article was the same woman, the woman they knew as Sarah. It wasn't an accident, Finn said, the words tasting like ash. In his mouth, the silhouette in the van, the body Tom had left behind. It was Jessica. He needed Catherine's sister to help control her. George pieced together, his voice trembling with the horror of the revelation. Jessica must have been part of the plan, maybe willingly at first, thinking she was helping her sister escape a bad situation. But she became another prisoner. And when she became a liability, when she wanted out, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Tomorrow, Mark had killed her. He had murdered Jessica and staged it as an accident. But he couldn't leave the body, so he had brought it back, hidden it, and then, on that final night, he had taken it to the woods in the van. The thing wrapped in blankets wasn't Catherine, it was her sister's corpse. The full monstrous scope of the conspiracy was laid bare. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a multi-year campaign of terror, identity theft, and murder, all orchestrated by one man. But where is Lily? Finn asked, his voice cracking. If Jessica is dead, and Catherine is in the woods, ... where did he take the little girl? George's face was a deathly pale. He looked at the screen, at the footage of Tom driving away in his truck, leaving the van and its horrific secret behind. He has her, George said, his voice barely audible. That night, he wasn't just disposing of a body, he was moving his prize. He got rid of the mother, got rid of the aunt. Now, he has the child. All to himself. The room felt like a tomb. The air was thick with the ghosts of the dead and the missing. The stakes had shifted from a personal, terrifying discovery to a vast, complex conspiracy that spanned years and crossed state lines. It was no longer just about finding a missing family. It was about stopping a serial predator before he disappeared with a 5-year-old girl forever. The police, Finn said, his voice shaking. We have to call them now. George nodded, but he hesitated. They won't just believe a boy with a drone and an old man with a spy camera, he said, his old fear returning. A man like that, ... Mark Peterson, ... He's clever. He's been doing this for years. He will have a story. He will have an alibi. He will turn it all around on us. So what do we do? Finn demanded, his frustration boiling over. We just sit here with all of this and let him get away. George looked at the screen, at the face of Mark Peterson, twisted in rage. He looked at the photo of Catherine and Jessica, smiling in a life that had been stolen from them. He looked at the birth certificate of a little girl who was now in the hands of a monster. No, George said, a new, hard light in his eyes. We don't let him get away. We don't give him the chance to talk his way out of it. We don't just give the police the evidence. We give them the man. He turned to Finn, his expression one of grim, terrifying purpose. He thinks he's silenced the witnesses. He thinks he's in the clear. He's going to get comfortable. He's going to make a mistake. And when he does, we're going to be there. He opened a new program on his computer, a tracking software. A small blinking dot appeared on a map of the state. After he destroyed my camera, I did something I should have done a long time ago, George said, his voice cold as steel. I put a GPS tracker on his truck. The plot twist was complete. The hidden clue wasn't just a video or a document, it was a live feed, a digital leash tied to a monster. They weren't just witnesses anymore, they were hunters. And the hunt was on. The blinking dot on George's screen became the sun around which their world now revolved. For 3 days they watched it, a two-man command center fueled by stale coffee, adrenaline, and a shared burning purpose. The dot moved from a cheap motel on the outskirts of Eugene to a remote gas station in the Cascade Mountains. Then settled, ominously, at a secluded rental cabin deep in the Deschutes National Forest. Mark Peterson was hiding, but he wasn't running. He was waiting. He's letting the trail go cold, George surmised, his voice a low rumble. He thinks Catherine is still lost in the woods, that she'll die of exposure or be taken by predators. He thinks he's a ghost. In a week, he'll take Lily and create a new life somewhere else. He's done it before. The thought of Lily, alone in that cabin with him, was a physical torment for Finn. He imagined her confusion, her fear. Did she know her aunt was dead? Did she understand that her mother was gone? Or was Mark Peterson poisoning her mind with lies, twisting himself into the role of her savior, her only protector? The psychological cruelty of it was almost as horrifying as the physical violence. They had a plan, as desperate as it was dangerous. They had compiled everything: the drone footage, George's surveillance videos, the fake IDs, the news article about Jessica's accident, the restraining order against Mark Peterson, Lily's birth certificate, to a single encrypted file. They sent it to a trusted contact of George's, a retired journalist in Portland, with a time-delayed release. If anything happened to them, the entire story would break, sent to every major news outlet on the West Coast. It was their insurance policy. Their primary goal, however, was not just to expose Mark, but to save Lily, and that meant they needed him caught in the act. With the child, with no room for lies or legal maneuvering, they needed a public, undeniable takedown. The opportunity came on the 4th day. The GPS tracker showed Mark's truck moving again, heading east, towards the high desert. George, using his formidable research skills, cross-referenced the location with local event calendars. The Crooked River Roundup, George said, his eyes lighting up with a grim realization. It's a big rodeo in Prineville. Thousands of people, crowds, noise. He's taking her there. Finn asked, incredulous. Why would he risk taking her out in public? Because it's the perfect cover, George explained, his mind working quickly. It's the last place anyone would look for a kidnapper. It's a performance of normalcy. Look at me, the loving father, treating his daughter to a day at the rodeo. It's arrogant, it's brazen, and it's exactly the kind of mistake a narcissist like him would make. This was their chance. The drive to Prineville was a blur of tense silence. George had a friend, a former police detective, whom he had finally called. He'd given him a carefully edited version of the story, enough to get him interested, enough to get a quiet, unofficial police presence near the rodeo grounds. But George and Finn knew they had to be the ones to corner him. They had to be the ones to trigger the final confrontation. They arrived at the rodeo grounds, a sprawling dust bowl of animal pens, food stalls, and a massive grandstand buzzing with a sea of cowboy hats and denim. The noise was overwhelming: the roar of the crowd, the blare of country music, the frantic announcements from the loudspeakers. Finding one man and a little girl in this chaos seemed impossible, but they had an advantage. Finn had brought his other drone, a smaller, quieter Mavic Mini. It was technically illegal to fly it over a crowd, but they were long past caring about the law. "I need to get up high," Finn said, his eyes scanning for a vantage point. He spotted a small Ferris wheel, temporarily shut down for maintenance, at the edge of the fairgrounds. It was perfect. While George coordinated with his detective friend on the phone, Finn slipped through a service gate and scrambled up the steel structure of the dormant Ferris wheel. He found a precarious perch on a crossbeam, his heart pounding. From here, he could see the entire rodeo. He launched the drone, its small body almost invisible against the bright afternoon sky. The live feed filled his phone screen, a dizzying, swirling mass of people. He began a systematic grid search, his eyes straining, looking for a big man with a small blonde-haired girl. He scanned the food lines, the petting zoo, the souvenir stalls. Nothing. He was starting to lose hope when he saw them. They were in the grandstand, high up in the cheap seats. Mark was holding a giant soda, his arm draped possessively around Lily's shoulders. Lily was holding a half-eaten stick of cotton candy, but she wasn't eating it. She was just staring blankly at the arena, her face pale and emotionless. She looked like a little doll, her spirit extinguished. The sight of her, so close, and yet so lost, sent a surge of protective fury through Finn. "I've got them," he whispered into his own phone, relaying the location to George. "Grandstand, section 304, row T. The police are moving in." George's voice came back, tense. "They're going to try and block the exits, but he'll see them, he'll bolt. He might use her as a shield. You have to get him out of that crowd. You have to isolate him." Finn looked from the grandstand to the arena below. A bull riding competition was in full swing. The chutes were on the far side of the arena. An idea, wild and terrifyingly cinematic, sparked in his mind. "I have a plan," he said. "It's crazy, but it might work." He told George what he was going to do. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Finn," George said, his voice heavy with concern, "that's too dangerous." "It's the only way," Finn insisted. "We need to create a distraction. Something he can't ignore." He ended the call before George could argue. He took a deep breath. He was about to do something incredibly stupid. He was about to become the main event. He maneuvered the drone, bringing it down from the sky, a silent, descending hawk. He flew it low over the heads of the crowd, who were all focused on the cowboy being thrown from a furious spinning bull. No one noticed the small buzzing object. He flew it directly towards the grandstand. Straight towards section 304, he hovered it 10 feet in front of Mark Peterson. For a moment, Mark didn't see it. He was watching the rodeo, a smug, satisfied look on his face. Then, his eyes flickered up. He saw the drone. His face changed instantly. The smugness vanished, replaced by a flash of pure animal panic. He recognized it. Or he recognized what it represented: a witness. An eye in the sky. The end of his freedom. He shot to his feet, grabbing Lily's arm. The crowd around them, annoyed by the disturbance, started to grumble. "What the hell is that?" someone shouted. Finn didn't wait. He turned the drone and flew it straight down, towards the arena. He flew it directly over the railing and into the open space, hovering right in the middle of the dirt floor. The bull riders, the clowns, everyone in the arena froze. The crowd let out a collective gasp. A drone had just interrupted the rodeo. Mark Peterson knew he was caught. The drone was a beacon, pointing him out to whoever was controlling it. He had to get out. He yanked Lily's arm, pulling her towards the exit tunnel. But Finn was ready. He had anticipated this. He flew the drone directly into the exit tunnel, blocking Mark's path. It hovered there, its red lights blinking, a tiny technological sentinel. Mark stopped, his face a mask of pure fury. He was trapped. The police were closing in behind him, and a drone was blocking his only escape. He looked at the drone, then at Lily, then back at the drone. He was cornered, and then? The Jumbotron, the massive screen that hung over the arena, flickered. The image of the bucking bull was replaced by a new image. It was the grainy salvaged footage from Finn's first drone. The footage of the white van deep in the woods. George had done his part. He had hacked the arena's video feed. The crowd murmured, confused. Then, the image changed again. It was a photo of Catherine Miller, a beautiful, smiling woman. The words, "Have you seen me?" appeared below it. Then, a photo of Jessica. Then, a photo of Lily, with the words missing. And finally, a live feed. A close-up shot from Finn's drone, pointed directly at Mark Peterson's face, his eyes wide with terror and rage, his hand gripping a little girl's arm. The camera zoomed out, showing the entire scene in the tunnel, the cornered monster and his captive. The crowd was silent for a beat, processing the impossible, cinematic drama unfolding before them. Then, a single person pointed. "It's him, up there." A wave of realization rippled through the grandstand. The murmur became a roar. The public, who had been spectators to a fake drama in the arena, were now witnesses to a real one. They were no longer a crowd, they were a jury. And they had just seen the evidence. Mark Peterson let out a guttural roar of pure, impotent rage. He was exposed, publicly humiliated. He let go of Lily's arm and charged at the drone, his hands outstretched as if to strangle the life out of the machine that had destroyed him. He lunged, and at that exact moment, 2 uniformed police officers appeared at the other end of the tunnel, Freeze Police. Mark skidded to a halt. He was surrounded. He looked from the police, to the drone, to the thousands of faces in the grandstand, staring down at him. Their faces a mixture of shock and outrage. He looked at the Jumbotron, which now showed his own terrified face, broadcast for the world to see. There was no escape, no alibi, no lie that could save him now. A third figure appeared in the tunnel. A woman, thin and frail, but with eyes that burned with an unholy fire. It was Catherine. George's detective friend had found her, brought her here. She had refused to stay in the car. She saw Lily, standing alone and terrified, a few feet away. "Lily," she breathed. The little girl's head snapped up, her eyes, which had been dull and lifeless, suddenly filled with light. "Mummy," she whispered. Catherine ran to her, stumbling, falling to her knees, and wrapped her arms around her daughter. She buried her face in Lily's hair, her body shaking with sobs of pure, unadulterated relief. Mark Peterson just stood there, defeated. The monster had been unmasked. The roar of the crowd was deafening. It was the sound of justice, public, explosive, and perfectly, horribly cinematic. Finn, perched high on his Ferris wheel, lowered his phone, his hands trembling. He had done it. The payoff was complete. The aftermath was a whirlwind of flashing lights, crackling radios, and the quiet, profound reunion of a mother and child. Finn watched from a distance as paramedics gently checked over Catherine and Lily, wrapping them in warm blankets. Catherine couldn't stop touching her daughter, her hands stroking Lily's hair, her face, her arms, as if to reassure herself that she was real, that she was safe. Lily, for her part, clung to her mother, her face buried in Catherine's shoulder, her small body trembling with the release of months of pent-up terror. The blank, doll-like expression was gone, replaced by the raw, unfiltered emotion of a child who has finally come home. Mark Peterson was led away in handcuffs. His head bowed, the arrogant swagger gone, replaced by the shuffling, defeated gait of a man whose world had been utterly and publicly dismantled. He didn't look at the cameras or the jeering crowd. He didn't look at the woman and child he had terrorized. He just looked at the ground, a fallen king in a kingdom of dust and lies. Finn and George gave their statements to the police, handing over the mountain of digital evidence they had compiled. The detective, a man with kind, wary eyes, shook their hands, his grip firm and grateful. "You two did something incredible," he said, looking from the 16-year-old boy to the 70-something-year-old man. "You saved that little girl's life. You shouldn't have had to, but you did." The story, as George had predicted, exploded. It was the lead item on every news channel, the front page of every paper. The drone, the rodeo, and the rescue. The media hailed Finn and George as heroes, an unlikely duo of citizen detectives who had succeeded where the system had failed. They were offered book deals, movie rights, daytime talk show appearances. They turned them all down. They hadn't done it for the fame or the glory. They had done it for Lilydot in the weeks that followed. The full, horrifying truth of Mark Peterson's crimes came to light. The shallow grave in the woods was excavated, and the body of Jessica Miller was recovered. The autopsy confirmed she had been murdered, her death staged to look like an accident. Catherine's testimony, combined with the digital evidence, painted a chilling portrait of years of abuse, coercion, and psychological torture. Mark Peterson, it turned out, was wanted for questioning in connection with the disappearance of another woman years earlier, in another state. He wasn't just a kidnapper and a murderer. He was very likely a serial predator who had been hiding in plain sight for over a decade. Finn and George became reluctant friends, bound by the shared trauma and triumph of their ordeal. They would meet sometimes on George's porch, watching the quiet street, no longer seeing it as a place of hidden threats, but as a community they had, in their own way, protected. George had dismantled his surveillance system, save for a single camera pointed at his own front door. "I'm done watching," he told Finn. "I want to start living again." He started volunteering at the local library, reading stories to children, his gruff voice softening as he brought tales of dragons and brave knights to life. Finn found that his drone no longer held the same appeal. The thrill of escape was gone, replaced by the memory of what he had found in the woods. He sold it, and with the money, he bought a new bike and started exploring the world on the ground. No longer content to be a spectator from above, but one crisp autumn afternoon, a few months after the rodeo, a car pulled up in front of Finn's house. It was Catherine. She got out, looking healthier, stronger. The haunted look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, resilient light. Lily got out of the back seat. She was wearing a new pair of sneakers, bright blue ones, that lit up when she ran across the lawn towards Finn. "We wanted to thank you," Catherine said, her voice clear and steady. "We're moving back to Portland, to be with my family. A real fresh start this time." She handed him a small, clumsily wrapped gift. Lily picked it out. Finn opened it. It was a framed drawing, done in crayon. It was a picture of a boy flying a drone over a forest. Next to the boy stood an old man with white hair, and at the bottom of the picture, a little girl with blonde pigtails was holding hands with her mother, and they were both smiling. Underneath, in neat, practiced letters, it said, "Our heroes." Finn felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at Lily, who gave him a shy, gap-toothed grin. "Your shoes are cool," he said, his voice a little thick. "Therefore running fast," she said proudly, and then she took off. Her blue sneakers flashing, chasing a yellow leaf that danced in the wind. Catherine watched her, a look of pure, unadulterated love on her face. "She has nightmares, sometimes," she said softly, her gaze still on her daughter. "But she's happy, she's safe. That's all that matters." She looked at Finn, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said again, the words carrying the weight of a world of gratitude. "You gave me back my daughter. You gave us back our lives." They left a few minutes later, a final wave from the car window, before they turned the corner and were gone. Finn stood on his lawn, holding the drawing, watching the spot where they had been. The emotional echo of the past few months was a quiet, bittersweet hum in his chest. The world was still a place of shadows and monsters, but he knew now that It was also a place of incredible courage, of unlikely friendships, and of a love so fierce it could survive the darkest of nights. He went to the edge of his yard and looked towards the forest. It was just a line of trees again, a place of quiet beauty, its terrible secret now brought into the light. The silence that had once screamed with unspoken horrors was now just ... silence. A peaceful, healing quiet. The cost of the truth had been immense, paid in blood and terror, but the cost of silence would have been unbearable. He looked down at the drawing in his hands, at the smiling faces, at the little girl running free. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. The haunting was over. The healing had begun.